just the brief introduction from you guys to the audience. So you want to start with just a little bit about yourself and then what it is you're doing?
My name is Daichi Iwata. I'm coming from NEC Corporations. NEC Corporation is basically digital technology company based in Tokyo. And what I do is I'm leading the FinTech team and the blockchain team, basically helping the financial institutions to transform themselves for the digital services. And also I do myself created a FinTech venture with the banks in Japan to provide the financial services.
Yeah, so my name is Geoff, and I'm the VP of and Financial China. I'm very much leading the technology and the business innovation for the company. One side, I'm the head of the Damo FinTech Labs. Other side, I'm also leading a business group, very much for business incubation and business development, right? And the Financial is a big startup company, and with 10,000 employees, right? So I think we are known for the Alipay, with the payment, the mobile payment. At the same time, working with our partners and the banks, we offering a lot of other financial service, right? Including insurance, lending, and also like some part of the credit score and so on. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Is that on? Yep. Sam Hunt, I'm the Director of APAC for Github. Looking after pretty much all things GitHub in the greater Asia Pacific region.
I'm Scott Mullins, and I lead business and market development for AWS in the financial services industry around the world. What that means is that my team is responsible for helping our financial services customers from FinTech startups all the way up to the largest banks, broker-dealers, exchanges, and insurers adopt our services for use in their businesses.
Thanks, guys. So I think I will kick that off with just a little bit overall question, because besides representing different corporations, you also represent different ecosystems. And I think in the ecosystem where I come from in the Nordics, there's a lot of discussion or talk about how we moved from FinTech is disrupting financial services and disrupting banks and towards more of a much more collaborative environment, both with banks and big tech. So just a little bit of perspective from what's the conversation in your ecosystems, where you come from, around that topic. Daichi.
Okay, so Japan is a very small country, but we talk a lot about fintechs. And again, it's not about the disruption we're talking about, but it's more about the collaborations now. And I just talked to you earlier before, but Japanese banks are encouraged to open the APIs, and now the legislation is done, so they're implementing the systems to open the API, and now the question is how to collaborate with others. But it's not only about the fintechs, but it's more like cross-industries. How to collaborate with local government, how to collaborate with the logistics company. So that kind of theme is more hot than just being afraid about disrupted.
All right, so just to stay with you just a bit, because I think it's interesting. In Europe, there's the whole open banking and PSD2 discussion. So how far are you actually in Japan when it comes to that? How would you describe that?
I think most of the banks just started implementing to be ready for open the API. And they just doing it. Now they just started really thinking about what's the success of business model for opening up the API and about the collaborations.
All right. So moving on to you, Geoff, what's your perspective?
Yeah, so and financial, we consider ourselves not like a fintech company. We are more like a TechFin company. What does that mean, right? If you look at our 10,000 employees, 65% are software engineers, right? So we are very much working with a lot of banks, financial institutions, not offering the technology and the platform, and also the mobile kind of banking kind of infrastructure and the technology itself. So in the last couple of years, we see more and more collaborations across these technology companies and also the banks. The reason is very clear, right? So there's still there's a lot of people kind of unbanked or underserved, right? So by working with the technology companies, we have a better way to reduce the cost and also reach more customers, make the kind of experience more seamlessly, and with the mobile kind of technology, with the internet kind of technology, right? So with also the new technology like artificial intelligence, the data kind of technology, obviously, we build a lot of the platform. Actually, the insurance, whatever, the lending, most cases we work with them. They are offering those services on our platform, but we offering the technology infrastructure. So from that perspective, I do see like digitalization, and also the like a mobile kind of banking become very, very common for all the traditional banks to transform themselves and to leverage the power from the technology to make the service more inclusive and also well-served. Yeah.
All right. So just before we came here, we talked a little bit about how Ant worked with fintech startups. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So you see, right? So like from another perspective, we offer this payment kind of infrastructure, which is we are known for, right? So then, from the lending, maybe the micro loan, and to the insurance, even including like wealth management. In most of the cases, and we have this open platform. We build the open platform, but it's the banks or the financial institutions. They bring in their fund management, wealth management, and also like the lending kind of service, right? So most cases, we offer some of the technical infrastructure for them to reach our users, right? And from that perspective. But from another perspective, I do see like by linking in the technology, we can make a lot of services more inclusive. For example, we can offer the wealth management just for $1 RMB. Yeah. It's unthinkable in like in a very traditional way, because usually, like in US, probably you need $1 million. People do wealth management for you, but we can offer the wealth management for $1 RMB. That means like a 15 US dollar cents, right? US cents. And from another perspective, for the loan kind of service, right? We can offer the loan to you in seconds, right? Usually in the US, in other countries, usually you need to go to like a couple of weeks, talk to banks, phone calls, and so on in order to get some loans. But we are able to go through technology, the reachability, and also the mobile kind of banking kind of infrastructure. We are able to send the money to you with a loan in seconds. Yeah. So I think that's how the technology is really changing some of the infrastructure, so make the financial service more inclusive, more reachable, and with a better user experience.
So Scott, just moving on to you, Sam, I will get back to you afterwards, but just to get your perspective on also what's the talk of the town in the ecosystem where...
Yeah, I think there was a general thought after the global financial crisis that innovation had kind of left the building in regards to large financial institutions. In fact, we talked about how Silicon Valley was now the source of innovation in financial services and other pockets of the world where you had FinTech hubs. And I think if you look at what's happened over the course of the last several years, that may have been true at that time, but we've really seen that be an engine to drive the flywheel for the entire industry really beginning to transform itself. And so I completely agree about the fact that now you have, rather than people fearing disruption from FinTech, they're looking to partnerships and for ways to really transform the industry. I mean, think about it. Several years ago, 4 years ago, we would never have thought that we would have had zero commission trading before we had a Robinhood. And now you have Robinhood offering that option, and many other large trading platforms are beginning to go to zero commission trading because that's what consumers want now in response to what's now available to them. And so I think we're seeing innovation drive the transformation of the industry completely.
All right. So Sam, just moving on to you, and it's interesting because you represent, of course, GitHub, but also a community of many developers. So what's the conversation where you come from?
It's really around a transformation internally with the banking institutions. They're looking to move away from that traditional siloed approach and get more collaborative and open across the board internally, but also externally as well. There's a big move to, like Scott just mentioned, to looking more at partnerships from an innovation perspective as well. I mean, all the banks that I work with have some sort of investment in FinTech or incubators, so that's really important. At the end of the day, the goal is universal, and that's a better customer experience. And in banking, it's been such a siloed world for so long, even within one institution, that's something that really needs to break down from within. And then the next part of that is having a better open source strategy. And what does open source mean to us, and how do we contribute back, and how can we make it easier for those partnerships to collaborate with us? So that's probably what I'm seeing. That and RegTech starting to creep into the conversation as well. It's like, how do we regulate this this rapid innovation?
So how do you actually, can you elaborate a little bit on how do you actually work with both the financial institutions and the FinTech startups? Because I know you also have some programs coming up, right?
Yeah, so we're obviously supporting startup programs across the globe, not just in FinTech, but FinTech's very important with us, or for us, I should say. With the banks, we work very closely, obviously, with what they're trying to achieve from a commercial perspective, but we also support and nurture their innovation startup programs and their community programs, and also a lot around STEM and where's our next wave of developers coming from, because that's a big problem for the world. Where are we going to get the next round of developers? If code is so important for everything that's coming in the next quarter century, who's going to write it? Who's going to do it? So I like to see the banks getting involved in what's happening in STEM and education across the APAC region.
Yeah, and how much do you in general see the financial institutions being involved with the FinTech ecosystem?
All the major banks I deal with have a commitment to the FinTech ecosystem. Absolutely.
So maybe it's a cliche, but I think it's Bill Gates that at one point said that that we need banking, but not banks. So it could be interesting to hear from Ant. So what's your perspective on that? Do we need banks?
Yeah, so I think the banks, even including traditional banks, they have a lot of their own expertise and know-how. For example, they have a lot of funds and capitals, and also they have a lot of experience to serve different kind of customers with specific needs, right? So that's why they are doing well, all these years, right? So banking is not just like a 1 year, 2 year, maybe 100 years has been there, right, to offer different kind of service. Now, we as a kind of TechFin kind of a company, actually we work with them very diligently, and today we are opening up all kind of technology platform, right? Not just like a cloud computing, and also with brand new technology like the blockchain, even the artificial intelligence, we open it up, and we are very much working with them. Try to have the more this digitalization and transformation, right? Because especially as I mentioned earlier, about this kind of mobile banking, and for them to reach some of the customers, individuals in a lower cost way, and also to within the technology to make the user interaction more seamlessly, and also from another perspective, based on the algorithms and the data. Sometimes we can serve a lot of these we call underserved people, right? Today, if you look at a lot of big banks, and they have a lot of very big customers and so on, they have a lot of experience, which actually we do not have, I have to say, right? Cool. But we, certainly agree, we know the technology well, and we are a technology company, we are very much looking forward to them and all working on that, and working with them to a little bit transform some of the infrastructure, so eventually can reach the customer better and serve them better. Yeah.
So I guess Daichi, that you advise a lot of the financial services companies. So what's your conversation with them? How do you advise them, and how do you see the bank of the future, and how do technology play in there?
So let me say I don't really advise. Probably I discuss together with the banks, but I think the discussion I'm having with the financial institutions in Japan, interesting thing is many people starting talking about what's called the information bank, because maybe the government is saying that. But what I think the story behind it, maybe the company like you as generating the values through the data, and people start talking about how we should do to use this data. But the people started talking about there should be a place I can store my data, and I can control my data, and there should be an entity that I can trust managing my data. And the people started really discussing about what is the future of the bank, and maybe one of the role of the future of a bank is managing the personal data on behalf of individuals.
So the data question is interesting. I would like your perspective on this also, because you are collecting a lot of data. So how do you see this? What's your perspective?
Yeah, so I think the privacy and the security of the data is always a top concern of our kind of company because our kind of business has quite a relevancy with that kind of usage, right? So there's two dimensions if you're talking about the technology for the bank, how to utilize the data, very much following Daichi's question, right? The first thing is very much about certain kind of workflow and also about some of the company inside kind of regulation, right? So it means like you have a traditional way to tag the data and very much you do access control and isolation. That's one kind of way. That's another way we see a lot of technology kind of movement in this space today. So actually it's two kind of technology I actually started doing well in certain degree, I would say. One is very much is trusted computing. So it means you put some of the privacy-sensitive computing inside some of the hardware. For example, like Intel's SGX, which with encrypted data in, encrypted data out. People cannot see the data, but you can still working on some of the transactions. Another one is very much on the encryption, right? So there's a multiple technology getting a little bit more mature than before. So one is the MPC, so the multi-party computation, right? The second one is homomorphic, right? And the secret sharing, and so on, including the most recent ones, I think called the zero knowledge proof. And actually, in the end of financial, we actually deployed those kind of technology actually with quite scale kind of usage today already by changing some of the data across different business domain, but without reviewing users' privacy at all in a specific way. So like also we believe like the issue itself is so important. And finally, a couple of years ago, it's a few company in China have a chief privacy officer, which actually directly reports to the CEO. Right, so we enhance the mechanisms and workflow not only on the data isolation side, and also put a lot of efforts. Actually, myself have a dedicated team with more than 50 people just working on the encryption, MPC, and also data isolation. So the kind of technology itself try to really make the same move forward.
All right. So Scott and Sam, I would like you maybe Sam first. Your kind of take on the whole data thing, because I guess you have a community that is discussing also the use of data and possibly also the ethical use, or where do we draw the line when it comes to using data?
I mean, when GitHub uses data, sorry, I can't say data. It's from the open source community perspective, it's open, we're transparent. So we want to make that available because we want to make it available for the greater good of that developer community. When it comes to the use of GitHub for private projects, that's obviously sensitive data. And if somebody chooses to share that, we have processes that we assist with around either making things open source or opting in to allow the use of that data for the greater good of the global developer community. It's probably less around the sensitivity of FSI data, but still sometimes very sensitive.
Scott, your thoughts?
Well, from AWS's perspective, when customers choose to put data onto our platform using our service, like Amazon S3 or Glacier or other storage services, they own that data. We're not reading that data. In fact, if you were today to open an S3 bucket in your AWS account and you were going to put it into our Singapore region, you would dictate what part of the world that goes into our Singapore region, and you would pick the availability zone that you want that data to go into. And that data would never go anywhere within AWS unless you moved that data yourself. So we're not accessing our customers' data. We're not reading it. We don't know what's in it. It could be the formula for Coke. It could be your social security number. It could be an ID card. It could be a picture of your cat or a meme. We treat that with the same level of security, confidentiality, and privacy across the board.
So how do you see, and I think that's a more general question to you guys. So how do you see, because that's something that is really filling up a lot of people's minds, the whole ethical issue, where how do we govern, in AI, how do we govern the algorithms? Where do we draw the line, so to speak? Just because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should. So what's your perspective to that? Well, that's an open question, so anyone can pitch in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the ethics in AI, something we just started discussing about, but I'm really passionate about what the trustworthy digital economy would look like. And it's interesting you mentioned about TE and SGX and MPC, because that's one of the key technologies that we believe in to provide the much stronger privacy. We're using SGX for NEC blockchain to keep the privacy, and multi-partition computing to compute without decrypting, so that we can understand inside. But probably this is kind of my question to you, because one of the things we're discussing about the negative side of AI is two sides. One is because AI is basically profiling the data, so it can reinforce the bias of the people. I mean, people has a bias, but because of the analytics model, AI can reinforce that, so it can increase the bias or discrimination. So what do you think about that? That's the one question I have. And the other question people started talking about is, if AI start rejecting the service, access to the service, like loans or, it's good for the inclusions. I think I totally agree. But if people start getting rejected without knowing the results, some people say, people get not motivated to re-challenge. It may have a huge impact for the humans. So I think you're a genius guy on data scientist, and so I wanted to hear your opinion too.
So personally, I have been working on the big data and AI kind of stuff like decades ago, right? So I do have some of the belief with regard to the algorithm and the data itself. So if you look at it, as you mentioned earlier, right? So about the algorithm itself, even about the data issue itself, right? With the new technology like MPC, you do have a way to split the data. You only see half of the data by sharing, and then you build the model, but you combine the model together. So there's no way for you to understand the sensitive part of the data, which is very much proved by mathematics, right? The cryptography, there's no way. So I think we are very much put a lot of dedication, as Daichi mentioned, to working on along those lines. Actually, the good part in the financial, so we are really putting into practice. And in a massive scale, and we are benefit from that, I have to say, with the technology. Now, coming back to the bias of the algorithm and also the interpretation of the algorithm, right? That's really depend on how you're going to develop that algorithm, specific algorithms, right? Because if you throw everything into a black box, you get the deep learning or the DNA or whatever it is, right? To just run through, you may encounter issue a little bit like that, right? But usually, a lot of cases, I personally do not believe purely data-driven AI-based algorithm. You have to have a knowledge and the data integration. What does that mean is you have using the algorithm, looking at the massive amount of data, do maybe lots of work, but eventually it's on top of the knowledge, the domain knowledge you have to put on top of the algorithm itself, right? And combine together eventually to offer a good service to the users. Now, end of the day, if you think about that, if you offer the biased or some of the service, decline some of service without explanation, the customer eventually will vote with their feet, right? So it's everybody's kind of the interest eventually to serve the people well, our customer very well, and also by keeping their data privacy.
All right.
Yeah.
So Scott and Sam, what's your take on it?
Well, I think when we think about the future and we think about technology in the future, sometimes we tend to take the human element out of the conversation, which I don't think is actually either one possible to do completely or really smart. When you think about AI and machine learning and the application within the industry, we're obviously very early in the adoption of those technologies. But at the end of the day, if an algorithm were to make an investment decision for me, if I were to invest my life savings with a robo-advisor, and that particular algorithm made an investment decision which was poor, we can't hold the algorithm responsible. In our regulatory systems around the world, the person responsible for that poor decision would be a principal of that firm. And so there's still going to be a human element that is attached to AI and machine learning and new technologies. And I think both from the standpoint of the people that are programming the AI, as you mentioned about bias, the people that are responsible from a principal or regulatory perspective for the outcomes for the firms, both positive and negative, as well as the human element from the standpoint of customers. And I think coming from a very customer-centric organization, never doubt the power of the consumer to drive the standards and where the industries go. And so I think the big break, if you will, or the driving force around how this evolves will be consumers and what consumers are comfortable with.
Yeah, so, all right. Sam?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it comes down to what the consumer is going to allow. And I think that's important. It's not like the data hasn't been used. I think there's either two ways that data gets used, particularly in finance. It's either regulated and required, or somebody says they want to share it because they feel it's going to be beneficial for themselves. I think when AI comes into play, we're still figuring out what the rules might look like moving forward. But it's an emerging approach to the use of anything. So it's going to be a learning process.
So GitHub just got acquired by Microsoft, and I think it could be fair to say there's some nervousness around it. So what's the community? What are the conversations you are having with the community around that?
So for the most part, it's been one of excitement. There have been parts of the community across the globe that had concerns about that, had concerns about GitHub, which is a very open global community of developers being owned by such a large organisation. But the reality is we maintain complete independence of who we are. Our goals, first and foremost, as an organisation is to the global developer community and making that better and easier for them to collaborate. And I think once people actually realise that our goals don't change, and in fact what we have now is a large organisation that is in their best interest to ensure that we succeed our goals, people become way more comfortable about the transaction.
All right. So, Scott, I'd like to ask you a little bit about how do you actually see, coming from the tech side, and just get your perspective also on the long term. Where do you see the financial services, the end vision? Where do you see it's moving, and what would be the most interesting technologies to look at in your opinion?
Well, we've talked about AI and machine learning. I think if we look at any of the cloud providers today, I think we would all tell you that AI and machine learning are the #1 areas of interest for financial institutions. I think that's for a number of reasons. I think obviously being able to create more engaging experiences for consumers by using AI and building digital agents. In fact, you can't walk through the expo without seeing different versions of digital agents and the like in the expo. So I think that's something that will be commonplace throughout the course of the next several years, and AI will continue to make advances there. I think machine learning is also an area of increased interest from financial institutions, because we're now able to move on from big data and big data analytics and actually really able to unlock value from data that we've not been able to do before, because we just haven't really had the technology that could stand up to the test. I think from the other standpoint, I'm looking at really changes in efficiencies from the standpoint of back offices. If you look at where people were focusing on cloud before, it was about cost to some extent, and then it was about improving kind of the edges, if you will, in the front office around maybe scaling websites or moving workloads that were maybe considered not as mission critical or to be sensitive with information from customers. But now the gloves are really off. You can look across the landscape around the world in different regions across all enterprises, and they all have cloud as a major part of their IT strategies, because it really is a technology refresh. In fact, that's what I like to talk about when we talk about the move to cloud. It's really just the next iteration of tech refresh in the financial services industry. And so you have many organizations who are moving in earnest to the cloud. Here in Singapore, DBS is obviously somebody who talks very much about their use of new and emerging technologies. Barclays Bank, HSBC, you have major financial institutions around the world who are beginning to make earnest adoption of these technologies and make them meaningful in their organizations.
So Daichi, how do you see the longer vision of where is financial services moving, and what's the impact of technology?
I mean, the role of technologies, I think, is drastically changing, and the meaning that starting like 1960 and 1990, banks keep using the technologies, but the role and the content of technology is really changing. And the role of technology is probably, in essence, only about efficiency and providing through the mobile or internet. But because of the variety of technologies, now we have quantum computing, blockchain, AI, they started to play different roles. It becomes the center of a business model, and also it, as you said, enables the financial institutions to serve unserved. I think that's a great impact about the inclusions. So with the good purpose, I think a financial institution can do much better, exciting thing, and that's what I'm really excited about too.
So just to hang on to the blockchain thing, I would like your perspective on, because there's a lot of talk about blockchain and a lot of experiments. So how do you see that technology specifically, changing financial services?
You know what? I keep thinking and I keep discussing about. I have no idea why blockchain is so talked about yet. I mean, I do spend a lot of time. We invest, but it's a very strange technology. Why people get excited? But one thing I really started to know is because of that use of cryptographic technologies, it empowers individuals, the people, to control the data around the cyberspace. Bitcoin, if I have a private secret key, I can claim my Bitcoin is mine. It's basically saying data floating around the cyberspace is mine. And I think it can start empower lots of individuals and citizens. And it can create a whole new business model, and it can create trustworthiness in cyberspace when we may need a lot more in this distributed world.
All right.
So can I
Jeff,
jump on here?
Yeah.
So I think when you think about DLT and blockchain, I think the real opportunities for those technologies, or I'll go back to my earlier analogy, is in the tech refreshes. Typically, the use cases we're seeing for blockchain and DLT are in the back office. You can look at what the ASX is doing with digital asset. That's a tech refresh. They're replacing the chess platform. It's an opportunity for that exchange to actually replace a legacy platform with a new one, which makes way for using new techniques and new technologies. And that's obviously in this case DLT with DA. I think that's the real opportunity for blockchain technology. I don't think you're going to see the immediate uplift that you're seeing from AI and machine learning, because AI and machine learning is more applicable across the front, back, and middle offices, and you're seeing results with the application of AI in the front office immediately and improved customer experiences. Blockchain and DLTs tend to be more towards the back end. I think it's going to be longer tail. And as the industry begins to refresh itself on the technologies that blockchain and DLT are applicable for, I think you're going to see it continue to have value.
So Geoff, what's your take on it? Because you also invest, right? So where do you put your money?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, right? So I believe in the future, or even today, it's a digital economy. And financial has some of the basic technology strategy called BASIC. B stands for blockchain, A, artificial intelligence, S means security, and I is Internet of Things, C, computing. Right? So those are all critical for the future banking or digital economy. So just a couple of words for each one. Blockchain, as we already mentioned earlier, we have a strong belief, not on the cryptography, right? It's very much on as a trusted machine, not across just A and B. It's not between A and B, it's a group of institutions. That's something really new, right? So eventually you can very much like circulate some of the certificate, the data, whatever it is, right? Across that a group of the institution to offer some of the service, right? So we see a lot of possibility in the supply chain finance, global remittance, or other kind of the business that we're already doing, working on that. So artificial intelligence already, Scott and other guys already mentioned, right? So obviously with the data, it's the automation. Theoretically, it's also automation boosts the efficiency, eventually makes the financial service with a low cost and also with the more seamless kind of interaction experience, right? So security, I think is also critical, because why? All the financial service company, you have to do the risk control. Otherwise, you cannot do the financial business, right? So actually the data and also a lot of algorithms can find a very good spot in the risk control, because it's all about to figure out, what is the fraud rate and so on like that, right? So we have been working on that area for many years, like now already the 5th generation. So our fraud rate is below 1 to 1 million. So it's amazing with the data and technology, right? So way below the traditional kind of banks. And the Internet of Things, right? So people seems like very far away from the banking, but we believe it's very much like on the corner. Because why? First thing, you may have some like interaction, like in the payment, in the physical kind of stores, there's like subway stations and so on like that. You need some of the technology to boost the efficiency. At the same time, we have like a face recognition directly for the payment. You can scan your face, you can pay, right? So now computing, obviously, like if you have a lot of data, a lot of graph, and there's a relationship, obviously you need a very big computing kind of infrastructure in order for you to go through. Yeah, so those are the areas that BASIC, the basic strategy for investment, basic strategy for our own development, and also I think could be a really kind of a boosting kind of technology for a lot of financial institutions in the future.
Okay, cool. Sam, your thoughts, especially on blockchain actually, what do you think about that technology?
Well, I agree that it's a technology refresh. I think it's a good way to look at it. I mean, you don't see builders building houses with plumb bobs and hammers and hand saws these days. So, but one thing I think I'd add to that is any technology that's coming in that's going to be used to refresh legacy is going to be only seriously make an impact if it's got resources following it as well, because you could potentially have the best technology in the world for a refresh, but if you've got no one to adopt it and work on it, that becomes a big problem. So, and that's something that we certainly see in communities. We see trends on what's being adopted and picked up. So that's an important part of it.
All right, thanks. So I think we'll open up for some questions here from the audience, and I'll just get the iPad here running. Here it is. All right. Let's see here. There's a question that says, what would you say is the biggest threat or challenge to FinTech in the financial services space? I think that's an open question here. So, guys, I'm reading it. So what would you say is the biggest threat to FinTech in the financial space?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot, right? So like, I think it's not a threat. Also, very much is a challenge, and a lot of time from the technology perspective, right? So, for example, especially for the field we are working on, we started serving a lot of these unbanked, unserved kind of people. I mean, financial services are more inclusive, right? So suddenly you realize like the digitalization of the social infrastructure itself is a challenge. For example, right? For any kind of financial service, we are required to do KYC. But in some of the countries, so maybe we even do not have a standard ID, right? So that's kind of like a kind of process, we have to go through. So for example, within the new technology like face recognition, eventually to help to build that kind of system, eventually you can offer a service. Because without knowing your ID, how can I offer a service? Because we all follow the rules like AML and EKYC and so on like that, right? So digitalization for some of the underserved kind of area is still a challenging task, right? So that's definitely something we will look into. Yeah.
All right. So there's another question here that we actually a topic we didn't touch so much upon. Is open source software the future of banking technology?
I think it's already a big part of banking technology. I mean, open source is in everything, not just FSI. But we have organisations like Finos that are looking to build out. It's a non-for-profit looking to build out open source innovation across the financial services, and it's a big part. And in fact, open source as an approach is one of the key parts to banking moving forward. That banks have to collaborate at a global level. If we don't get sort of global standardization around what we're doing, then it makes it very hard because they're being driven by what the consumers want, and the consumers want what they want in their hand, basically. So in order to do that, the world is way more global than it used to be. You don't walk into a bank anymore. You jump on your phone at the airport and you say, I'm going here and I need money when I get there. And the only way to do that is to have better global collaboration.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, most of the banks, the big banks, the big financial institutions have legacy systems. So they probably cannot migrate everything to open source, and it doesn't make sense. But again, as I said, the financial institutions have to collaborate with others. That's a huge change of business model. It's not only regulated, it's regulators are forcing to collaborate. Now, if you want to collaborate, you need dive into these, open source communities. And I started joining Linux foundations. And NEC has a long history of working with Linux Foundation's open source community, but it's the other department of NEC is doing it, not from the business department serving for the financial services, are not working with this open source community. But I now have to work with them because I do need to understand the developing and engineering communities of open source, what they are thinking about APIs, what they are thinking about securities. And we have to do bridge the gap between the language of engineering and the language of banks. And I think it's an interesting space for, I think, next couple of years.
All right, thanks. So there's another one here that gets a lot of votes here, I can see. There's a number of countries in the region mandating platform and data localization. What impact is it expected to have on TechFin and its scalability? Did you get that?
Yeah, I think obviously there are changing environments around data locality and data sovereignty and data residency. I think this will be a space that continues to change. I think a lot of the current thinking around that is based on legacy regulation, as well as legacy business models. And I think as technology continues to improve, and I think even more importantly, we'll go back to consumers, as consumers continue to demand differentiating experiences from financial services, much like they're getting across all platform type companies, you're going to see that continue to evolve. But I think it will be a gaining factor where you do have localities who require data to be in a country specifically for specific reasons. You're going to find it difficult to see innovation happen there. You can look at what's happened recently in Korea. Korea had those requirements in place up until recently and has rolled back those requirements and are now allowing a little bit more freedom in relation to where data gets to go. And so I think you're going to see that continue to be a trend over time of evolutioning, or actually probably more of a revamping of those requirements.
All right. So there's another thing, we already talked a little bit about the open banking, but it says here that how will big tech take advantage of open banking developments happening globally from EU to Australia? I think we could start off with you, Daichi, maybe. What's the question again? How will big tech take advantage of open banking developments happening globally from EU to Australia?
Okay, we study a lot about what's happening in EU because what's about PSD2 and Open API initiative is a very interesting topic for even the communities in Japanese financial institutions too. And I don't know if you guys are taking advantage or not. I think in this case, big tech meaning you guys, but I don't think they are taking advantage of it. I think it's more like collaborative approach about the people trying to find their own roles with new ecosystems. And ecosystem is starting becoming a cliche word, but I think it's an important concept for this connected world. Everybody has to find the new roles. Even company like us, we're 100 years old, more than 100 years old, but we really have to change our role. And people are trying to find a new role in this digital economy. And it's not about the competition, but I think it's more trying to find out how to create more values together. And it's a totally different approach for creating the business, I think.
So the whole open banking thing, we have little time left. The whole open banking thing, there is a discussion around, does that make the financial services company being only providing the infrastructure, and then someone else actually creating the value on top of that? So what's your thought on that?
Yes. I think so. Well, just on the question, I think that at the end of the day, big tech's making it easy for people to make a decision. So everything's independent. Nothing's forced down there. There's nothing untoward happening. I don't know. It's hard to actually answer this question in any way, shape, or form because there's a lot of different angles that you can look at it from.
All right. So one last question here, very quick answer from one of you guys. Let's see here. Open banking versus open source. Which will happen for FIs first?
I think open source is already happening, so that's the present. So I think we have a winner. But open banking is here. And I think it's an inflection point for the industry. And I'll go back to the question before on what's the advantage. We're already using open banking in the EU and Australia as an inflection point to help our customers evolve. From the standpoint of organizations like HSBC, whose open banking platform in the UK runs on AWS. Very similarly, we've helped a customer, one of the big four in Australia, build an open banking platform as well. It's an opportunity where you're required to actually open up the bank to do so and to build a next generation technology platform. And Sam, I would say it's not just that the bank is going to provide the infrastructure and the value is going to be provided elsewhere. There's also value in being able to be that hub that brings the value to the consumer. Because as a consumer, I don't necessarily want to have to go out and source all of those things myself. You can look at the iPhone. All the different applications that run on my iPhone, I got through the Apple Store. I downloaded those directly to the Apple Store because Apple was able to curate those for me. And so I think there's going to be a real advantage for financial institutions in open banking to be curators of value, because as a consumer, I'm going to get tired of having to go find my own value all the time. It's going to be really helpful to have a trusted partner in my bank who I've had a trusted relationship with over time to provide that ecosystem of value to me.
All right, great.
Much better.
I think we're almost out of time, right? Or do we have time for a little, a quick answer more here? You were just putting the mic up.
No, I was just saying that was a much better answer from Scott.
All right. So thank you very much, guys. I think we're out of time. Great pleasure to talking to you, and thank you very much for coming.